First of all, with regard to transparency, the plan, the agreement currently calls for compliance with the Texas Public Information Act. I would ask you to please consider just compliance with Texas Open Meetings Act. I think that is going to be important. I know there's some concerns about time and cost and money, but let's face it, the Park Board has managed Fair Park for decades under TOMA, and I think we can do that as well. So just if you would consider that. And then I have a couple of questions regarding the cultural affairs component of it. I know we added an obligation to, well, first of all, that all the public artwork there, which means all the murals, all the building art, and all the things like that, would always remain property of the city, and that you would work with the Office of Cultural Affairs for any modifications, changes, additions, or anything like that, and so I appreciate that. One thing I was a little concerned about is it looked like there was a reduced obligation to maintain the public art if some components of funding did not come through, and I think that it's important that kind of no matter what, we maintain those cultural components out there, and I don't know if you want to address that. Yes, Walt.
We agree with the language that I thought we negotiated, and that is conserve the public artworks. When you talk about restoring artwork that is 80 years old, you're talking about tens of millions of dollars, and that is not in this needs assessment that the Park Department prepared. So what we're saying is that we agree with you in spirit, but we do not have the resources under this contract to really guarantee absolutely that those public pieces are going to be restored as opposed to conserved and maintained.
Okay, so as far as conserve and maintain, does this contract say that they will be conserved and maintained at the current level or better, regardless of funding constraints?
Yes, but with this caveat, if some of that bas-relief on the tower building should fall to the ground because it hadn't been maintained properly, it's not just a matter of gluing it back up there. According to the historical preservation architects, this is a very sophisticated and time-consuming and expensive process. We don't have those funds. We have no funds except that small amount that I've allocated for contingencies and new old projects. We don't have any funds to do that.
Okay, so I guess I'll get with the city attorney. I want to just maybe really look at the language that says that the foundation will conserve and maintain at the current levels the art and the thing. The other question I have about is that I think Mr. Kingston was also kind of asking about was the funding that currently is coming through OCA and that y'all are going to redistribute to these organizations. A fair amount of that funding is actually for maintenance of their buildings, and it's not clear to me and it's not clear to me how much of that funding is for programming, but there is a clause, I believe, in the agreement in Section 3.05 that talks about that those institutions will not lobby the city for additional funding. And I think we might want to consider separating out the operating and maintenance funding for those buildings from the programming funding, because I do believe that it's the intention of me and I think a lot of my colleagues to support the cultural arts in this city. And unfortunately, many of those institutions have been burdened with maintaining buildings, which is not the right thing for them to do. It's great that the foundation to take that on. But I do want them to be able to come to City Hall to look for funding for programming, to support small groups and things like that. And maybe we need a distinction in that area.
Lee, excellent point. The $1.3 million that is going right there, you are absolutely right. It's for utilities and basically building improvements, very little for programs.
Right. So the preclusion in the clause where it says that those institutions will not come to the city to ask for additional funding, I think needs to be modified to say allow them to come for programming money.
So they could go independently back to the city
right.
for that kind of programming funding.
Right. So if we can look at adding that in, that would be great. And I think that holds me for right now. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ms. Arnold hasn't spoken yet, so we'll have her go next.
Thank you. I don't have anything major. I'm earth shaking, but I do want to do as many of the colleagues have done. Mr. Human, thank you, first of all, for your work. Park Board members, I see a few here today. We want to thank them also for their efforts, and I have to be a little bit biased and call out Mr. Larry Hodgeberg, who is my Park Board representative, who's also an attorney who has helped to make some modifications with this particular plan. But I think, Mayor, what I need to, I'm going to ask a couple of questions, but I want to make a couple of comments. I hear my colleagues talk about transparency, and I hear your comment, Mr. Human, about us moving up the hill and having those challenges, and we're in the situation that we're in because of the failure of the city to do its job. So I have just a slight concern, because what you're describing in terms of the situation of the scenario at Fair Park is pretty much representative of what I represent as a council member. The same scenario, the lack of infrastructure, the lack of services, this lack of access. And so it's with that I do have an opportunity here just to take a pause and just say where are our priorities. Now, we do want to support this particular project, as we do with our council member here, but I want to make sure that I also put here before all of you is that Fair Park is not the only park, if you will, that we're being asked to fund. And so when we talk about transparency, I would like for the transparency and the same energetic flow of energy to come not only with Fair Park, but also Clyde Warren Park, which in the middle of all of this is asking for more money. The deck park that's coming in that lacks some transparency, so I want to put that on the record. That's the one on Marsalis is coming in District 1 and 4. So I want to throw that in, but I want us to have the same intensity when it comes to scrutiny. So board members, members around the council, I just want to make sure you remember that. Excuse me, and I will probably follow up on that. I do have some 88 parks in District 4, I believe, that need funding. And so as I'm approaching my constituents, they ask that question about priorities. So on the timeline, Mr. Mayor Rollins, you may have to help us with this if Mr. Willis and Mr. Human can't. But what I've been asked to ask you is the timeline. What is the urgency with this timeline?
Well, there are two issues. One is we have to vote on any money in the budget for this year if we're going to move this ahead. Second is the foundation's timeline. They would just want to know whether we're interested in doing this or not.
All right, so we're not locked in. We don't have to make this decision in terms of the funding for this particular managerial format. It's just it's optional. Is that what it is?
It's in the city manager's budget. So if you don't want to spend the money in the city manager's budget, you'll have to make an amendment to get it out.
All right, and then well, if the council decides, we could make a decision.
We can do anything we want.
Anything we want to. We could move this to next year.
We can do anything.
We can do that. Okay. The question is in terms of community input. Now we're talking more now about the need to get input, and most definitely want to. I heard the comment about making sure the southern sector is sitting at the table. But the trick to that is, I found that sometimes the southern sector definition, we don't all agree on it. So when we talk about input, I notice there have been some meetings in some parts of the city. I think in the areas that I represent, we haven't had a full hearing. When I talk about the Oak Cliff area in District 4, where we have those constituents who've been able to come to a public hearing. True enough, Fair Park was available, but I'm just telling you that what I have received from my constituents is that they've not had that opportunity to do that, or maybe they have it and didn't choose to go. So I did want to put on the table for those who've asked me, the council can delay this transfer of power if we so choose as a council, all right? The second is the bond. We want to get an understanding on the bond proposal. I believe there is going to be an impact if the bond is not passed. So what date are we asking, if the council approves this, what date will we go to to the voters for the bond?
We haven't made the final decision, but we're talking about this May.
How much will we be asking the voters to put?
We haven't decided as a council. We're going to be doing that after the budget is finalized.
All right, so the question, I think, for my constituents is, we would make a decision on the bond based on what? The amount of money.
Based on what we want to put in it.
So September, I was going to say nothing, because we need some of that money to go to some of the other parts of the city, so we'll have an infrastructure where we can get development all around the city. So the bond package is going before the voters. We don't know what that amount is going to be until we decide, but we have to decide on what by September 21st, Mayor. How much money we want to put in the mayor's, in the manager's
Annual budget.
annual budget, which is what amount? We're asking for what amount?
The amount that Mr.
I just want to
Human
repeat
showed.
that for my constituents. We're asking questions.
Year one is what, Willis?
How much money do you want for us
16.7
on
is year
September
one.
21st?
16.7?
And then it increases by
Yeah.
$2 million.
Yeah,
a
but
year
for
and then
next
it's
year,
capped.
just for next
Okay,
year.
but how much do you want us to submit to the manager's budget by September 21st?
Say again?
How much money do you want from us as a city by the 21st of this month?
In the first fiscal year, except for that adjustment, because it's only going to be 3 quarters and not 4, basically it's around $12+ million.
You need us to get
In the
$12
first
million
year.
to Mr.
In your first fiscal year. Our calendar years, our fiscal year would be on a calendar
Mr. Human,
basis.
Mr. Human, let Mr. Winters ask the question because it's a stub year there. So the
Councilmember, the increase in the first year budget, once we take out the proration because we're only funding 9 months instead of 12 months, is if you're funding the full year, the increase would be approximately $5.6 million over what's currently funded in the general fund budget for Fair Park. So it's 11.1 from the Parks Department and Office of Cultural Affairs, and an increase of 5.7 to get to the 16.7 million. However, we're prorating that because we're not, the commencement date is proposed in the contract to be January 1st versus October 1st. So we're keeping, the Park Department is keeping 3 months of operation. So the total budget is for 16-17 is $12,525,000.
So when my constituents ask, the ask will be $12 million is what we need to put into the budget of the city manager.
That's the total, but again, that amount is an increase over our current year budget of about $1 million.
All right, no, I'm not trying to be disrespectful. I'm just trying to give these very simple responses to my constituents. When they ask, how much money are you putting into the manager's budget, I simply want to say.
You know what? Let's
how
ask
much.
the city manager.
Okay, that's easy. That
City
works for me, 'cause
manager
my
is the
time
line
moving
item
on.
for.
Come on, because my time is
Fair.
going on. Thank you.
Okay.
It's right there.
Some of the numbers may be a little different in that whether or not you include revenue or not, but the numbers that we're looking at is, the ask is about $7 million over the current year.
I know, but that's just, what is the number in the line item on Fair Park?
That's what I'm,
No, $7 million plus,
incremental increase over what spending is for Fair Park.
which is
or
what?
That total,
She's just asking for one number. The number in your plan for Fair Park is what? For 1 year?
17.7.
17.7. Seems,
That's all I want. All right, thank you. All right, and the last thing that I have a concern about will be the ability, the performance. And I guess my time is running out, but I will come back to performance, because I understand if they're not performing, this particular management company can go out and hire its own audit company, if you will. And so I don't understand the process. What happens if those performance results are not what we accept as a city, or if there's a question about the company that is selected to do the audit? So sometimes we have our friends to, get the proposal, if you will, of the contract, and then we have our friends auditing us, and so I want to come back on that, and then also come back on and I'll come back since my time is running out for more intense response. Naming rights, what will we be naming?
The foundation would have naming rights, but it would have to be approved, and depending on the length of time, it would be approved by the park board.
By the park board or the board?
Park board and
All right.
and the park director.
So I will come back to that. Those two are a little bit troubling, but if we do want to do what we can to support all of the city, thank you, and I'll come back.
Thank you, Ms. Arnold. Ms. Alonso.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, all of you, for presenting this and providing this information. I think some of the questions that were asked, that I was going to ask or had questions on, have already been answered. But I did want to make this comment, though. There's been talk about the staff, and I just wanted to add that we need to recognize and continue to talk about how this staff, like you mentioned earlier, it's something about overworked and underpaid. We want to make sure that we tell everyone and continue to talk to everyone about how Fair Park staff has been and time again every year there for the constituency as a whole. And you know, you mentioned that they've been working based on what they've been given. Yes, they've been working very hard, and so we got to make sure we talk about that they've been working very hard with what they have.
That's right.
And so that's something that we want to recognize, appreciate, thank them, because that is something that it has not been mentioned, or at least I haven't heard it. So I wanted to make sure that we address that. The other questions have been answered to the questions that I had, Mr. Mayor. Thank you so much. Thank you, staff.
Thank you, Ms. Alonso. Ms. Young has not spoken.
Thank you. All right, thank you. Let me also reiterate the thanks to the Park Board, certainly to the District 7 Park Board member, Sean Johnson, to Mr. Human, to the Mayor's Task Force, and to others who have worked on this issue. Let me say that I'm excited to hear, not only around this horseshoe, but in the audience, that there is so much concern, or as I think Mr. Kleiman put it, passion, for the South Dallas Fair Park area. And I would hope that as we are, I see many members of the South Dallas Fair Park community sitting in the audience today. We just had the opportunity to pass the South Dallas Fair Park PID. I hope that you all will be just as passionate in supporting that effort. There have been a number of community members that have really been working hard in the South Dallas area on a number of issues, and I haven't seen the passion there to get behind the community and help with those issues. And so I hope that when all the smoke screens and smoke and mirrors are gone, that we will see the same passion and the same commitment from the city of Dallas to help with the infrastructure concerns, to help with the job training programs, to help with the jobs that are needed, that I continue to hear as I'm walking the streets and at the car wash and on the corners talking to those in South Dallas, that this is not just a show for political reasons, but that you all will continue to be committed to our neighborhood associations. I had the opportunity to talk to one of our first ladies this morning that said, I have a plan and we need help. And we have a nonprofit that's trying to do work in the community over in the Bertrand area, and we need help. And so I hope that all of these members in the audience that are saying, and around this horseshoe, when other issues come to this horseshoe to support funding for South Dallas Fair Park, I hope that the passion and the support will be there as well. And this is not just a political issue. Let me say that, because I don't like to see the people who elected me that I represent to be used as political pawns for political issues. So I hope that we will continue to see that passion, and I look forward to working with each of you as we try to work on those issues in the community. We know that there are issues, as we've heard, around this horseshoe. We didn't get here overnight. We're not going to get out of this situation overnight. It is going to take years of us working together to figure out what the plan is and how we get there, and how we get there even more so as a community. I've said it a number of times around this horseshoe in committee meetings. that there has been willful neglect by this city of the South Dallas Fair Park area, willful neglect for decades. And now here we are. Here we are trying to find a solution. We have those that are at the table working to find a solution, not working against solutions, but working to really find viable solutions. And I am committed to working with those that are at the table to find those solutions, whether that's community members, whether that's the business community or city staff or even my colleagues around the Horseshoe. And so I've been public and on the record that I do support a public-private partnership. I will continue to support a public-private partnership. I will ask my colleagues to support a public-private partnership. And to say, I think it's disingenuous to continue, for folks to continue to say that the community has not been involved. When we've had meetings, I've also met with many neighborhood associations about this very issue, because those are the folks that elected me. I have not, I will admit, gone around and met with other neighborhood associations in others' districts, because I don't represent those districts, but we have had the opportunity to sit down with District 7 constituents. I have here before me petitions from District 7 constituents who say, I support the privatization of Fair Park and the public-private partnership, and that it will bring new money to South Dallas Fair Park area in terms of development and infrastructure needs that we know we need. And I understand that this is a management agreement, but because I was elected by the people and sent here by the people, one of the position papers that they have provided with me talks exactly about that. Mr. Human, will you be committed? Will this foundation, not just you, but the foundation, be committed to partnering with organizations such as the South Dallas Fair Park PID, WINS, the Zip Code Connection, to be partners in the community to help and engage? And there are many others that are doing this work in the South Dallas Fair Park community. They also said they want the $25 million put back into the funding so that it will help with the infrastructure needs and other projects around South Dallas. And we certainly want to be supportive of the community park. And there are those that are making light of some comments I made, but I will tell you, and I will continue to say it, that when I'm out in the streets, what I'm hearing about mayor and council is jobs. We need jobs in South Dallas, and we know that in order to get there, we're going to need some job training and job development programs. We need apprenticeships. Everyone can't afford to not work while they're doing on-the-job training, and so we will need apprenticeships to help get us there in the community. And so let me also say, as my time runs, that Fair Park and the adjacent neighborhoods, that we understand they are connected, and that not only Fair Park but the adjacent neighborhoods must both be preserved and revitalized. And I understand that that's not just the job of this foundation, it's also the job of this council and the mayor to figure it out. That the State Fair of Texas contract came before this very body in 2007. And I didn't hear the passion and see all the voices coming to the table to say, let's renegotiate this contract in a different way. And so I hope, again, that we will continue to see the voices of the community at the table and engaged. Let me ask this quick question about the institutions. It's come up a little bit, and let me just say that there are some concerns as I've met with the institutions there inside of Fair Park, just in terms of how this funding will work, whether or not they can request money from the city, and I know we've talked about that a number of times, so I would request that we would meet with the institutions, to staff and to the mayor, that we would continue to meet with the institutions to make sure that we're being responsible there in terms of funding. Also, I was provided today, I know that one of the concerns that continues to come up as we talk about this idea, this notion of gentrification, this idea of eminent domain, and some of those that are putting that into the atmosphere, the very ones that support it from a real estate proposition. But we do have in Section 32-11.5 what is known as the Fair Park boundaries, and one of the solutions that I raised was to create some type of SUP process or something that whereby the foundation would be required to come back to the community and come back to this council or to the park board if ever we had what happened in 1969, an attempt for that to happen again in terms of the Fair Park encroaching more into the neighborhoods. And I was made aware of the fact that in May of 1987, it is on the books in the shape of an ordinance, 19541, that before Fair Park boundaries are established, before they may be expanded, we must have a public hearing before the city council. What I would like to see happen, council, is that we would amend this ordinance to say, to include the foundation and institutions at Fair Park, that before they would try to expand further into the neighborhoods, to make it specific to the foundation and to any institution in Fair Park, that they would have to come before the park board and come before the community before they would be allowed. The city council, yes, the city council is already in there, but that we would include those extra layers of protection. And so I'll be raising that as an amendment to that ordinance in the days to come, and I hope that you all would support that so that we can protect the community from that end. And then I have a question for staff, Park and Rec staff. So on page 16, it talks about the park board asks for one member of the community and one preservation member to be a part of this body, of this board. And I guess I'm curious about when that switched. When I last heard, I remembered it was 20%, and the board had healthy conversation about not giving it a number, because if it was a big board, one person would not be adequate representation for the community on a big body. And so when did we switch to just one member?
Yeah, Ms. Young, it was 10%.
Okay.
Or a minimum of
Okay.
one. So, with 9 members, we
Okay.
rounded up to
And so
one.
I won't
Yes, ma'am.
rehash that. I would agree with my colleagues in terms of, and I know that Mr. Human, you said there are 2 and there's this other layer, but I would agree going forward if we would change that recommendation to a higher percentage so that we ensure that there's more representation of the community on the board, that I would be supportive of that. Also, the underground parking is what I support. The community has said loud and clear they do not want high-rise parking structures. And so my time is running out, but as I said, I hope that my colleagues will continue to be supportive of issues, and I look forward to working with all of my colleagues to make sure that we have a contract that we can all be proud of as it relates to Fair Park, and that the community can be proud of as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Grayson.
Thank you, Mayor. Before I get into what I was going to ask, I want to second what Ms. Young just said about underground parking. No above-ground parking garages. And your foundation would probably be the ones that would make that decision as to where the parking goes. So, no parking garages. And you know what? Ask the State Fair, since all the parking is related to them, to pay for those underground parking garages. Okay, so I have one question for you, Walt, and then I think a couple of questions for Mr. Winters. You mentioned earlier today that we really need some street improvements around the park. And you mentioned 2 or 3, and as I was adding it up, it came to around $25 million. Right. So you would want those to be in the bond proposition, but not the Fair Park bond proposition, the streets proposition, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Because I think as I read all of this language in this agreement, it only pertains to within the boundaries of Fair Park. Right. So you're going to ask us to spend another $25 million.
They wouldn't let me in. It doesn't relate to parks, but it's $25 million in the streets and the infrastructure budget.
So it would be in the
25.
streets proposition of the bond
MLK,
program.
East Grand, and then $5 million for underground drainage problems.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that would be a different proposition. Okay, but it's $25 million. Right. Okay, thank you. Mr. Winters, I'm going to get down kind of into the weeds here, I think, but in this management agreement on page 42, it talks about turnover and the expiration of this agreement, or in the event the foundation shall cease to operate or determine to liquidate and dissolve, it talks about all the remaining assets at the time that the foundation may determine to liquidate or dissolve. And it says they should either go to the city or to another 501c3 charitable organization for the benefit of Fair Park. Why would you include that? I certainly don't. I'm not in favor of giving their assets to another 501c3 charitable organization, I think it should all come back to the city. I would probably make a motion to eliminate that language.
Understand? Yes,
Okay.
ma'am.
I don't know. I was wondering if you could tell me why that was
No,
put in there.
that was probably language that was in the zoo contract, perhaps, and that served as the basis for this contract.
Okay,
But
I
I
just-
understand that concern, and that could
Yeah.
be by amendment taken out.
I would certainly offer that amendment. And then on page 18,
Which page was that, Ms. Grayson?
management agreement, page 18,
18. Yes, ma'am.
it talks about expenses, and it talks about operating expenses and capital expenditures. And under capital expenditures, it talks about improvements, alterations, additions, equipment, tools that have a useful life in excess of 1 year. I find that, I know in our capital, when we do bond program sales, it has to be some item that lasts longer than 20 years. And so why is this, I don't want to be buying hammers with bond program bond program funds.
I would have to ask the city attorney if there was a specific reason for 1 year. Again, perhaps
Okay.
it was a standard language in other contracts,
But you could get back to me with
Yes,
that?
I
I'd like an
certainly can.
answer
Yes,
to
ma'am.
that, because I don't
Yeah.
want to be buying things like tools with bond dollars. Okay. And then I wanted to ask, there was a section in here related to new for-profits that might go into the park, and how then the city funds would be supporting them like we currently do with the institutions already there. Why would we want to do that? Is that like to make an attraction for for-profits to come in and occupy some of those buildings?
Well, over the last several years, we have been in discussion with multiple groups that want to come to Fair Park with a new venue or visitor attraction that would be a nonprofit operating partner. So I think the intent is that if there are any opportunities for new private partners, nonprofit organizations, that they might be eligible for some of the cultural program funds.
Actually, this specifically talked about for-profits. So I have a question which you can get to me later with an
Okay.
answer about why we would be throwing money at for-profits.
I'll get
And
back
I
with you on that.
think those are my questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Kingston.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to try to move as fast as I can. You're going to pay a living wage.
I'm sorry,
You're going to pay a living wage to all employees.
going to pay a living wage, certainly.
I'd like that included in the contract, and to the extent it's practicable, I'd like for contractors of the foundation to pay a living wage as well. It's the policy of this city, and I think if we're treating the park as a way to do neighborhood development, I think that's going to be important. I saw a reference to South Dallas Trust Fund, not South Dallas Fair Park Trust Fund, and the paragraph, frankly, is very confusing. What is being proposed to be done with South Dallas Fair Park?
It's called the South Dallas Fair Park Trust Fund, and part of the JEXA contract requires that you all negotiate with them, requires that they pay so many cents per ticket that goes straight to the South Dallas Fair Park Foundation. I don't know how much of the money of the foundation has actually flowed back into Fair Park. I don't think any, but could be wrong on that.
And Willis, then the remainder of the obligations of the city to the trust fund are going to be met through the state fair? Y'all can get back to me on that later. The issue is that we just got finished putting some money back into that organization, and I want to make sure it doesn't go anywhere.
It's not going anywhere.
Okay.
Those other provisions are still in place.
Great. Thank you.
Mr. Kingston, I think you are correct. That should say the South Dallas Fair Park Trust Fund.
Yeah, it's just a cleanup.
Yes,
It's no
sir.
big deal. I'm with Mr. McGue. I think what he's suggesting is that as revenues increase in the operation of the foundation, that should reduce the management fee. I'd love to see that. Willis, let me ask you a question. How do you see this affecting future Parks and Rec budgets?
So this is part of our overall park budget. This year we are going up. We are increasing in large part, due to this increase to this management fee for the foundation. So
with regard to every other park and rec center in the city of Dallas, how do you foresee the operation of the foundation and the increased management fees being paid in affecting the budgets for the entire rest of the system?
Yeah. Yes, sir. It would be similar to the funding that was phased in over time with the Dallas Zoo contract starting in 2009. As you know, we started at $10.8 million the first year, then it escalated to 12.8, and it's now at 14.8. So it would have similar effect. Yes, they're all in a tight budget year. There could be some competition there, but we've had good budget years since 2009, and that hasn't been an issue.
Yeah, and let's hope that goes on forever. What do the Friends of Fair Park, what is their future with regard to the operation of the foundation?
The Friends of Fair Park is organized under the donor and member relations.
How are they going to be able to raise any money if the foundation is raising all the money for Fair Park?
Friends of Fair Park primarily has been raising money, small amounts, from members. They also have done a very credible job in bringing legislative earmark for funding into Fair Park, as well as securing foundation donations. What I hope that can happen is we dramatically increase the number of members, and that the money is important, but of more import is to have a larger number of people throughout the entire Dallas area and really broader region that are members and friends of Fair Park.
One of the foundation boards that I think you probably talked to had a specific desire in the mayor's task force that once this foundation got underway, that essentially it would raise all the money for Fair Park and there would not be any role for the Friends anymore. And so with them being kind of the most visible fan of the foundation plan, I have a real question about, it seems to me that the foundation, the operation of the foundation, if it's raising its maximum amount of money, is probably a competitor to Friends of Fair Park. So that relationship remains opaque to me. The mayor's task force wanted to put a park back in the park. And everybody agrees on that. But the details of this are important because we don't want to buy a pig in a poke. And that is a reference to you spending approximately 10 times as much on the swine building as on the park. There are two major issues here. One is the
you
way
wrapping up?
Can I just? I'll
Go
finish
ahead.
up. Then I'll take round three. Thank you.
No. He's just going to wrap up. Go ahead.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mayor. There are two major problems that have come to the fore in talking about Fair Park. One is the way it interacts with the community, and hopefully in the future will add greatly to the immediate community as well as Dallas as a whole. That's what we all want. That kind of stuff started with the idea, I think the most agreed upon idea about making it a park, making it interact with the community, is tearing down the fences and jackhammering out the parking lots. And that's not in this plan. So I don't understand where that went. That's in the mayor's task force report, and now it's gone. The second issue is our duty to preserve those buildings. What we have learned in Dallas, if anything, about preserving historic structures, it's that it is critical to have long-term tenants in the buildings so that somebody is the cheerleader for the maintenance of that building. And the idea of fixing up a building that will continue to be vacant and expecting that it will remain in good condition is really, really foolish. And the thing that has been missed here is that the State Fair has not been challenged in this proposal. They continue to want the use of the building to be empty most of the year so that it can sell mattresses and hot tubs,
Thank you.
just during the fair. And that's where I think the opportunity was really missed. They have signaled that they're willing to really compromise. The compromise they need to make for the purpose of preservation is long-term tenants for the buildings. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Clayton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just as a matter of procedure, if we're going to add amendments to this contract, do we do that today or do we do that?
It'll be in time. I'm thinking about it, so let me listen to everybody keep talking, and I'm listening about that.
Okay.
I'll come back to that, Mr. Clayton.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Then I guess a comment. I think Ms. Young kind of took the tenor of what I was trying to say about, when I question you, Mr. Human, thank you for being so graceful today and answering all the questions. When I question making a park a priority, I'm saying that because the citizens told us it's a priority. And I think we have a social contract to our citizenry to make sure that if we're spending this money, and to Ms. Grayson's question, if it's $75 million on the bond and $25 million on the streets and $5 million on plumbing, on a bond program that may be $600 million, let's say, I have $300 million just in street and alley needs in my district, and I might get $15 million. I am concerned about maximizing the spend to take a treasure and making it efficient. So whether we do it today, Mr. Mayor, or we do it in a few weeks, one of the things that I'm going to suggest is that I will make an amendment to make it to where we have 3 city council members on this board of 9, because if I have to go to my constituents and say, look, for the good of the city, you're going to get $15 million, but we're going to give 105 to a 2 square mile radius, I need to be able to have the accountability to say it's not because of the wisdom or the opinion or the wants of 2 or 3 or 4 people. So I guess that's just a statement, Mr. Mayor. I'm happy to make that today, or I'm happy to make it in a few weeks. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. McGue.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A lot of my questions have been answered, but as it relates to the bond package and the request for effectively the $75 million for $50 million match, why would we not, inherently it makes more sense to have a one-to-one match. Why is it being asked that we don't have a full one-to-one match, or that first $25 million comes from the city alone?
I'd like to answer that. Because when I took a look at the needs inventory, I was appalled that you had $25 to $30 million of projects. The electrical vault that I showed to the park board, and the dangerous situations out there that were going unattended. And it seems to me that the very first thing, if I were a potential donor, I want to say, you really need to attend to the most difficult thing, because there's going to be a lot of flack around this horseshoe if someone is killed or injured or hurt out there without the security. And so, why should the private sector match something that should have been done 3 or 4 decades ago? And that was just on that priority 1.
We're going to be asking them to do that on that anyway.
Yeah.
If we're going to be going to the taxpayers for a bond package, I think it makes sense to have a one-to-one match from the onset all the way through.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Mr. Wilson.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a few quick questions, lightning round, Mr. Walt. Just kind of going through the contract. The section 2.04, the Fair Park intellectual property, could you help me with the last sentence that talks about, during the term of the agreement, the city will not use the Fair Park intellectual property without notification to the foundation?
Section 203.
204.
204. Intellectual property. So I'm sorry, Eric, what's the question?
Just what does that mean in terms of, as far as city promoting, do we get permission from the foundation, or how does that work with our convention?
Councilmember, I'm going to ask City Attorney to come address that question.
Quickly, my time is running.
Stop the clock, stop the clock.
Stop the clock. Stop the clock.
Connie Tankersley with the City Attorney's Office. The reason why it's drafted that way is because we are exclusively licensing them the first right to the intellectual property, and so it's a general practice in the industry that when you do that kind of licensing, that while you're not giving the ownership away, you would consult with them before you incorporate it into your own use, because we may be doubling up, for example, on how it's being used.
Okay. All right. 205, you talk about short-term leases, I guess making contract or, I'm sorry, let me back up. You talk about the leases, the short-term leases and how we go about doing contracts, but what about long-term contracts? What's the consideration in, I guess, consolidating those or renegotiating those during this time of the agreement?
Well, the foundation will have to come to the park board and eventually city council for anything that goes beyond a year. I mean, that's a requirement for any leases. So as far as concessionaire, vendor contracts, they could do that on a short-term basis through the AA process, just like basically keeping, just like we would do it under the AA process, that's something that they will do under their regular operations and management of the Fair Park.
Okay. Mr. Winters, maybe you can answer this question in terms of the athletic events. It talks about any event that, let's say we lose a game, that we are to continue to pay the management fee for 18 months up to that. How far in advance are our contracts with the current games we have in terms of if they want to cancel a game, how far in advance are we required to be notified? Stop the clock. While he's reading, can you stop the clock? No?
There's still time running.
Well,
All right, can you get back with me on that
Texas
one?
OU game goes through 2025, but there's two other games. The Heart of Dallas Bowl, I'm sorry, I've got
Correct.
a long list here.
But how far in advance do they have to give us notice that they're not coming
Heart
back?
of Dallas Bowl goes through 2018.
Correct, but how far in advance do they have to give us a notice that they don't want to renew?
Those are all committed.
Okay, well, get back with me on that, please. Get back with me. Again, I want to go back to the in-kind donations on Section 303. I don't agree with the taking in-kind donation. I think it needs to be a monetary value associated as opposed to an in-kind. Let me go to Section 305. This goes back to our resident institutions. As the management fee increases, I understand the allotment or the allocation will be increased or decreased. Let's say if it's not fully allocated, then it's reduced by that amount, correct?
Yes, sir. There is additional funding for resident institutions over time, above and beyond the $1.3 million in this contract.
Okay. Is there any safeguards to make sure that we maintain our residential institutions such as African American Museum, make sure that they're not weeded out in terms of funding? What safeguards are there?
I wasn't sure I heard everything in your question, but that was one of the reasons that we're also involving the Office of Cultural Affairs in their review and approval process with their board, is to, in part, to address that.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Arnold.
Yes, sir. Oh, thank you. I was just doing a couple of things. Mr. Mayor, quickly, with all of these modifications that we're offering, we are proposing to have this ready by the 21st with the language. I just wanted to ask.
By the
The
yeah.
21st.
Let me come back to it.
Okay,
Let me come back to that question.
All right, so I wanted to ask that because I'm running to a number of things, but quickly, on the management piece, I want you to, that is a concern because they're able, if they're not performing, the understanding is that this particular management group can hire its own auditing firm. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am. The intent is that they would be required to fund hiring a nationally known firm with the approval of the park department.
All right, so it has to be approved by the
to
park
address
department.
your concern.
All right, that would be that. I wanted to make sure I had some understanding on that before I offered. The other piece has to do with the acquisition of land. I'm reading and still concerned about the land that's in a discussion outside of the park, I guess beyond the gate. And so the other piece would be, does this board, this management group have the right to purchase land? I mean, is that addressed here in Mr.
Foundation, as I said before, is not going to be purchasing any additional land outside the borders.
Does it speak to that in writing? In this contract, I didn't see it. So we don't know that. But the reason I'm asking is because I brought this topic up with the zoo. The zoo is able to purchase land. And so as I talk about both of these entities, I wanted to make sure we had safeguarded the city's investment with that. So I'm down to 329. So can this particular entity purchase land?
The agreement, Art Hudden with the city attorney's office, I don't believe the agreement specifically prohibits the purchase of land. It states that the foundation is supposed to be doing everything within the park. Now, to the extent they came up with a need to benefit Fair Park that would require the acquisition of land, that would have to be in their budgets, in their plans, and run by the park director and I believe the park board. So while there's not a specific prohibition, it's not contemplated within the initial charge to the foundation to work within the boundaries of Fair Park and improve Fair Park.
All right, so they could go beyond the boundaries that are here now. That would be okay.
Well, not without input from Park Board,
right.
And one would assume
But if it's a
council at
boom
that
in
point.
economic development, that may be a cause to, if there's a boom in economic development in the park, then that might push the envelope a little bit where there would be a need to move beyond.
The idea that comes to mind if they needed storage space or something like that and needed to expand, but that would have to be part of the vetted out plan. Now, I will say they do not have any sort of eminent domain authority, so they're not going to be able to do a forced sale, if you will.
But those things could happen through the park and the council. As I move forward, I think the MWBE is what I'm still getting the pressure for in terms of asking a question and ensuring that we have some MWBE definite points. And so I wanted to make sure we talked about that, and I don't know that we've met that particular threshold in this document, but there will be some offering there. The last piece here, I'm hearing now, and perhaps it's my error, $50 to $75 million might go on the bond package. I thought that was something we said we didn't know. I heard some of my colleagues use that term. $50 to $75 million bond before the citizens?
Yeah, that's what he's asking for.
That's what you're asking for,
Yes.
but the council doesn't have to give that.
We can do whatever we want.
All right, I just want to make sure I'm having to get answers from my constituents. And I think that's the main thing I want to do. So, Mayor, I'm just asking these questions for clarifications in terms of amendments that we will offer. But once again, since my time is up, Mr. Human, I want you to know it's not that we don't trust you, and I've read a lot of good positive things about you in the city of Dallas and your mood to push for diversity and fairness, and I want you to know that's documented in a book. So I did want to let the audience know that where we feel like sometimes it feel like we're beating you up, we're not. But, you know, there are folks who come beyond us, after us, with genes that don't reflect what your interest is. And so we have to ask these questions for the benefit of those that we represent. So thank you for my time. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Medrano hasn't spoken, so we'll let him speak next.
All right. Thank you, Mayor. First off, I'd like to just, for the record, Ms. Young isn't the only person that represents neighborhoods around Fair Park. So District 2 is around Fair Park. Also, and we work well together. So we do, and this is a big, huge commitment we're making. We're gonna make, but one of the main things and the number one thing that I think our city needs, and we haven't gotten right, is to make sure we're paying our police and fire. So in order for us to be a great city, we need to have top public safety. We need to make sure we're paying our police and fire. So I don't think I can support this until we get that right. Definitely want to, I look forward to working with my colleagues and Willis and everyone else involved on these amendments that I heard. I heard some great ones, council member on the board, or whatever, what did you say it was, Scott, the big table. Having council members at the big table, all Dallas residents, those are great suggestions, and there's many more, so I look forward to in the next couple of weeks working with you guys and see if we can work through this to make it better. Even though it might be better, I don't think I can support it because of what I said earlier. So definitely enjoyed listening to all of your comments and look forward to working with you in the next couple of weeks. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Callahan.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I just wonder why we keep talking about the State Fair of Texas. I mean, we all recognize that is the signature event that goes on, out there. It's a 24-day thing. But sometimes I think we hold them to a different standard. We want to let them do all the heavy lifting. You know, they ought to be doing this, they ought to be doing that. But candidly, there is an agreement in place for Fair Park, and it's a 25-year agreement, and that I don't think we're up for renewal till 2028. But when we've done festivals and athletic events and concerts and other agreements and so forth, we honor those agreements. We don't go back and say, you guys, you know, like Irish Fest, you guys ought to be doing road work out there, or you ought to be putting up fences or doing this, that, or the other. So I think the State Fair of Texas does what we expect them to do within that 24 days. If we want to sweeten the deal for the foundation later, they can certainly tweak that agreement and ask the State Fair to do some things that they've done a lot over the years, and perhaps they can do more over time. But I wish we wouldn't continue to kind of pound them. Again, they're our best partner, and they're the reason that Fair Park was put there in the first place. I wanted to tell a little story, and it's really a story about Fair Park, and I just wanted to kind of use something that I've known for a long time in my childhood. But it's a story about 4 people named everybody, somebody, anybody, and nobody. Fair Park needed to get rebuilt and improved. Everybody was sure somebody would do it. Anybody could have done it, but nobody did it. Somebody got angry about that because it was everybody's job. Everybody thought that anybody could do it, but nobody realized that everybody wouldn't do it. It ended up that everybody blamed somebody when nobody did what anybody could have done. Now somebody is ready to take the wheel and really make a difference, and it's called the Fair Park Texas Foundation. I've waited on everybody my whole life to step up to the plate and do something about it, make a difference, make Fair Park better. Walt, you're the guy that stepped up to the plate, and I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Ms. Gates. Ms. Medrano, you done?
Oh, yes.
Ms. Gates.
Thank you, Mayor. No, I have to follow Callahan. I don't think I can come up with anything that quite that clever, but go freestyle. Yeah, I'll let you do that. I'm too set in my ways for that, Mark. I don't freestyle very well. Where's my questions? Did you, when you started looking at, and you've studied the park and its assets and its liabilities and its needs and what can make it better, what do you think the total worth of the property and the assets are in the current status? Did you kind of evaluate that?
In November, I said this is potentially $1 billion park.
Yeah.
It's not anywhere close to that, for the simple reason of the reasons that I gave here: lack of management, lack of marketing, and woeful lack of funding. So someone coming in and appraising these buildings, taking a look at your overall assets, looking at the out-migration of museums and other events because of that lack of funding and management, I'd have to downgrade it as an appraiser. But that's the bad news. The good news is you start from this point, and it gives you a great opportunity to really turn that whole thing around and make it one of the principal assets in the state of Texas. It has the potential.
Well, after hearing everybody speak this afternoon, I think we have a responsibility to take care of this asset to see, unless we're going to sell it. And I don't think I hear any voices or anybody ready to sell this asset on a market and let somebody else, take care of it. And we need something radical. I want to make it right, and there's a couple, and I think the park board did a good job on making some amendments to make sure that we did move forward in the right direction. I hear a lot of discussions about what I know people know would be poison pills. If they put it in there, it just stops it. And, if the agenda is to take the fair out of the fair park, I guess that potentially trying to stop this may do that, but it's not. As we all know, the fair has a long time contract. If it's that somebody else wants control of it, we could RFP it out and see. I don't know where we're going to get with with that, and with now the knowledge that everything's going to have to what we want to see in there, because we've seen a lot of different or heard from a lot of different people. We could leave it in the park board's hands and the city's hands, or we could put more people that represent the city on these boards, but that's what we've done, and we haven't cared for it. So we're really at a crossroads, and I want to get it right. I'm still struggling with why, if we're going to get this plan and implement it and make it more successful, why the fees have to escalate. I haven't heard a good explanation for that, because I think the revenue should start coming in, and we should be able to run more efficiently, and it should cost the city less. I mean, that's what I would like to see. So I'm struggling with that, but I want to be part of this team that really does get this in the correct kind of management hands. And we're not the ones. I mean, Willis, you've done a tremendous job for the resources you have, but we're not taking care of the assets. Why is it that a foundation? I mean, just simply, why do we just took this extra $7 million? I think we've come up with the fact that I think in the briefing we had listed it's going to cost us $6.5 million more, maybe it's $7 million more in this first budget. What if we just took that money as a city and we just gave that to you, Willis, and then we kept it in our hands? Why are we not suggesting that? Why are we saying a foundation is it because we can leverage future funds or future dollars, or what's the rationale for that?
Well, I think that's
if it's just money.
That's one of the primary principal advantages of this contract, council member, is that with the foundation they have the ability to raise private funds and to approach donors that would give money to a foundation before they would.
And you don't feel like we have that ability?
No, ma'am, we don't. It's the same with the zoo, Arboretum, and Clybourne Park.
And I think the zoo has doubled with very little more money from the city. They've been able to double their expenses.
I think the zoo is a great model for what we're looking at here today with this management agreement. In 2009, our budget was X. Today, it's substantially higher, and they're able to attract private donations.
And the city's not.
And their attendance now is projected to be 1.1 million. When we privatized, it was probably almost half that.
All right. And what if you can't get all the bond money that you're asking for? What if when we start these discussions and we want to put more into streets and more into, what's going to happen at that point? Does it just make things go slower? That might be a question for Walt.
And I'll let him answer it quickly because your time's up.
Address those priorities, priority 1 and 2, and that's not enough. That comes to about $85 million, and what you're committed to in that contract is only $75 million. So there's already a shortfall in priority 1 and priority 2.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Lastly, Mr. Griggs.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a question about the performance standards. Who's going to write the performance standards and the indicators? Or you, Walt. Mr. Human, that's fine. Either of you can answer.
Mr. Griggs, the performance indicators we've talked about, the performance objectives, I think will be written with both the foundation will probably do the first draft and submit them to the department, so it'll be a back and forth process to create the objectives and the measurements, and bring those to the park board for their approval. So there'll be a back and forth discussion.
Those will require park board approval?
Yes, sir.
Will they require council approval as it's written now?
The current agreement as it's written says that the performance plan, which includes the measures, will be subject to park board approval.
Okay, thank you. And I also have a concern about if revenues keep going up, why the management fee would go up. A big difference with this property and the zoo is this has an opportunity for more year-round events and year-round tenants. It's hard to get someone to move into the gorilla cage and have an office. There's just not that available space. But you have so many buildings and empty buildings at Fair Park, it's a great opportunity to bring in additional revenue. So it seemed like our goal is to make you self-sustaining, Fair Park self-sustaining. And we would get there by you increasing your revenues And the city of Dallas, the citizens, would decrease the management fees over time.
There's a critical financial mass that is required to have a viable corporation or an entity. You do not have that by a long distance now. And I cannot commit. I do not want to set the foundation up for failure if I simply follow the siren song and let's cut the fees back beyond where they should be. I presented to you earlier what in my heart I really felt that you should fund. That was cut back during the negotiation process. I believe that we're there in terms of the minimum amount.
Mr. Human, I'm not talking about the initial one. I'm talking about even the initial one. We take your position. Over time, then, gradually decreasing it. Not the initial one. Let's accept what you're saying about there being the initial shortfall in capital and it needs a minimum corpus to continue.
Yeah.
But over time, as you build things, that you get these tenants, you get these people in buildings, you increase the number of revenue opportunities, bring in more games to the Cotton Bowl, bring everything else in, then why wouldn't we want the management fee to decrease so then the city of Dallas could spend that money on, for example, the area of outside of Fair Park?
In the steady state budget, I showed about $3 million a year for new projects. I showed about $2 million only for critical CapEx needs that they've identified. So if you extrapolate that for 16 years, I know this sounds like a lot of money, but it's really not in terms of the hill that has to be climbed out there. If we're talking about a new children's or family park, if we're talking about reconfiguring inside of Fair Park, if we're talking about other improvements,
I only got a minute left, so to move on. We just have a disagreement, and I'm not getting a satisfactory answer. So staff's welcome to weigh in on a memo, or you're welcome to send me an answer later. But it's not addressing the question on why the revenues are going to, the contributions from the city are not going to decrease over time. Because a lot of other parks around the country that get going with city help have that model because it gets you to sustainability. And so I'm not hearing an answer. I want to go back and reiterate, because only a minute left, we really need to make the park a priority. Not only the planning of it, but the building of this park needs to be in priority one. It just does. The funds need to be there. That is the most important thing. Tear down the walls, bring in the community in this place. It has to be done. We have to put our money where our mouth is on this. And then also on the board, I fully support more members, more people who live in the community, particularly in District 7 and District 2, near there, on the board, having a seat at the big table. We absolutely need community buy-in and community support, and they need seats at this table, more than just one assigned seat with this time they have 2 seats. Need at least 4 seats on there from people who live in and around Fair Park to make this work. That's what's been missing for so many years. What I think, how the city has let down Fair Park is not having enough people involved. You can always use more, and there's some great people over there who can be a part of it. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. I want to answer a couple questions, make a couple comments. How are you doing, Daniel? Daniel, you've been working hard your whole life on this thing, so we appreciate Ms. Alonso said something, and please pass it on to your team.
They very much appreciate that.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So there are a lot of amendments kind of thrown up on this contract today, a lot of ideas. Mr. Human, how do you feel about the contract? We haven't asked you.
Thank you. Because really the foundation has not had an opportunity to participate in the amendments that were placed in or given our opinion. We have real problems with some of them. Some we can negotiate, but others I think we need to have a two-way discussion and really resolve some of these hard parts for the foundation.
All right, so this is what I think we should do. First of all, it's near impossible, anybody that's done any business, it's near impossible to negotiate a deal with 30 people. You had 15 park board people and 15 of us, and we're negotiating that deal. Staff, legal, it's a little chaotic. A lot of great work's been done. Okay, thank you everybody that's done this, but I think we still are not there yet. So I'm going to form a special negotiation team led by Ms. Young, Mr. McGue, and Ms. Alonzo. Okay, and I want them to get with you. I want everybody to hopefully we can capture some of the thoughts that are there, and if I don't know, Willis, can you listen back to what was said so we don't lose any of these things?
Yes, sir. We have learned to listen to the audio
You've
and
done
video
this before.
tapes in the last 2 months. We're very good at that, and we'll do that here too. I've
Okay.
recorded several of them, and we'll go make sure we pick them all up.
Thank you, Mr. Winters. And then that'll give you a chance to push back on our guys and see what we want to do. And then we'll, Ms. Arnold, you asked a question.
I had a question for you,
Okay,
sir.
yeah.
Yes, just since I'm going through this experience
Right.
about districts. Mr. Madrano mentioned that part of this was in his district, and I know I'm going through that, and I know how it feels when people vote against me in my own district and not include me. So is it possible that he could also be on the task force since he has constituents around the Fair Park?
Yeah, I'm not, mainly because he said he's not voting for it, okay? I'm trying to get people that are thinking about voting for it. If you're not going to vote, you can't do a deal. You can't do a deal with somebody if, you know.
I also said I was going to work on it and work towards trying to get
I'm
everybody
sorry,
to
I
come
misheard
together.
you. I said
I can still vote against it, though. That's
what you said.
Yeah, I
That's
can.
what you said.
Yeah.
And so I want somebody at the table that is interested in kind of trying to get that done. That's the decision. But Ms. Arnold, you asked another question, and that was what happens by the 21st. All right, I'd like to get this done by that period of time. If for some reason we don't, okay, we can still vote on the city budget, and the city budget has the money in there. We can either take it out or we can put it in, and if we leave it in and we don't come to terms, we can always vote to use that money or put it into savings, a reserve account. So that's basically how we'll do that. I've got a couple other things, Mr. Human, but we've kind of battered you with a lot of questions. Do you have any closing remarks? I'll let you have, and then I'll close up with my thoughts.
Yes, I do.
I'll give you 120 seconds.
120.
Okay.
Thank
2
you
minutes.
very much for your time. What I'm asking for is the tools to really create a great fair park. Adequate funding, a management mechanism. If we can come together, we hear the constituencies that we got to convince, and we're going to try to get our word out much better than we have in the last 5 or 6 months. And that is, here is the constituency. It's not just around this horseshoe. We've got to convince the citizens of Dallas who will be voting for bonds. We've got to convince people that have been sitting on the sidelines, donors, to come back into Fair Park. We've got to consider employees and potential CEO for this organization that this is a good place to be. We've got to convince volunteers and the general community, and that's why we've got to really act like a team. We are competing outside the Dallas area with other venues that are delighted with all the flack that we're causing on this thing. So what I'm suggesting is, let's get the facts out. I asked humbly for your opinion on this. And finally, I ended my presentation in November with one of my favorite poets. It was Robert Frost. And remember, he talked about the road not taken. And I said, one path is marked status quo. That's what we've been about for the last 40 years. Status quo. Let's not delay. Let's take the path less traveled. But then I went over to the Dallas Public Library and I found another poet with a poem more online to what we're talking about, and I'd like to read that to you now as the closing thought. Quote, Dallas City Council, please vote 15-0 to revitalize Fair Park it's the only way to go. Otherwise, it will just be more of the old status quo. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Human. Appreciate it. My couple of thoughts. Mr. McGue said it, Ms. Young said it. I love everybody being involved and caring about this. This is very important to the city of Dallas. I feel it. People stop me in the street and are excited about what's going to happen with Fair Park. I also love everybody's focus on South Dallas Fair Park. We need that. We need to help that community. We've neglected for too long, and so I appreciate it. The job that Mr. Human took on is a difficult one because it really pulled everybody together. And let me tell you all the people he's got to pull together. First of all, the community, the folks that live right there. Second, economic development specialists, real estate specialists, believe that we can drive and make more money out of this thing, okay, as a city, tax base. The preservationists, which are extremely important about this, and these buildings have been going to hell in a handbasket because we haven't spent money. The fiscal conservatives, and I'm going to look straight ahead when I say that, okay, that don't want to spend more money, and historically we've had a good amount of them. The current residents of the nonprofits, we've got those folks that are there, and keeping them involved in this. New visitors, the Chambers of Commerce, the MWBE folks, and lastly, the philanthropists. So pulling everybody together, I think, is what we're trying to do here, guys. Everybody should feel that they are part of this solution. Now, the question is, are there other folks besides the Fair Park Foundation that wants to do this? After you endorsed the Mayor's Task Force plan, I went around and I talked to a lot of people, including Mr. Human, and I will say there were a lot of talented people, but Mr. Human's the one that had the vision and the heart and the desire to do this, because there's nothing, the foundation is not going to get anything out of this. These individuals are not going to get anything out of it. And I believe that we've got the best team that's out there for us at this point. Nobody else has stepped up and all this time rang me and said, I'll put a nonprofit together and negotiate. Now, what we misunderstand here is this whole discussion about the parks, the park being our number one priority. I think we all agree. I think I could get unanimity in this room. How we spend the money is our decision. He's making recommendations based on the state of the buildings that we've had before. His belief is we've got a better chance to raise private money for a park than private money to fix the pipes. We can say he's wrong. And we can say, Mr. Human, if we give you that money, we want you to put it in a park. He may not take the job, but we can say that to him. So we have the power. It's not about him, it's about us, how we want to spend the money. Now, I will say that I respect the preservationists too much in this city to just easily cast them aside and say we don't need to take these buildings seriously, because there's some terrible fix-ups that we need to do. Also, the terms of the deal, to me, are extremely tough. Good job, Willis. Good job, Park Board. You guys have negotiated some tough deals. They're different than the zoo and the aquarium. I mean, at the Arboretum. We would never have gotten this those deals done with those terms. And so I'm still hoping that you come out of that negotiation session, Mr. Human, wanting to do this. But we want these guys to succeed. Lastly, the whole question about when revenues go up and they're making so much money, why do we have to pay so much money? We don't. When that happens, this council looks at that and we say, you know what, we're not going to give you as much this year. We have the power to do that. So this contract does not lock anything in place. And if we all want what we're all talking about, these revenues to go up. And so hopefully that will be the case. And if that happens, we can deal with it. The whole issue of the state fair is critical because it seems to be the root cause of a lot of angst in this. We know in reality what we've got, how long the contract is, and it's going to outlive all of us. There is one man that can figure this out for us, and it's Walt. It's not going to be our new city attorney, okay, because it's pretty black and white. And it's not going to be us taking a vote. It's going to be an agent for us that we empower to try to get there. So that's one of the reasons why I want to put my arms around Walt and say, help us figure this out. And by the way, I feel the same way Walt does. I've not heard one thing from the state fair that says, talk to us if you want to make this thing big in a big way. But they're not going to negotiate with 15 council people. They're just not. We've got to work with, they want to work with this foundation. The other point is Ms. Gates raised this question about the purpose of this. And I thought it was a very astute question, because the purpose of the foundation is really to deal with Fair Park and take it to the next level. The reason I'm so excited about it is what it can be to South Dallas Fair Park. So I don't want to stop there. And I've told the community, I just want to be real honest, what I've been telling them, all right, this isn't about just putting money back in Fair Park. This is using Fair Park and then putting money back into the community. Whether it's a bond, whether it's funding for WINS, it's some of the things that Ms. Young talked about. And that's my agenda, because that is one of the most important areas in the city of Dallas. Big discussion of the board makeup. We can talk about it. I will say that Mr. Human talked, he asked for nominees from the park board, he asked for nominees from city council, and he has been negotiating with a lot of people to put the right people on it. And so that is not his doing, that is the park board and the council's doing. But you can talk about that in negotiation. I will say that this notion that somebody from University Park can't be on the board is just a smokescreen for getting rid of Walt Human, okay? It's pure and simple that. Because if somebody offered us $30 million from a park, from University Park, we'd pick it up in a New York minute. And we'll decide as a council how we want to move forward, but let's call the truth the truth. We don't have that in the Arboretum. We don't have that at Clyde Warren. We don't have that at the zoo. And I'm sad about that, because we may not want to do this deal, but it's not because of Walt and what he's done these years. The criticisms, I've heard this. One, not enough park. Hopefully, we've put this to bed, and we will, if we, as Mr. Griggs said, want to change the order, and we want to put our money, our bond money, into a park, okay. I'm not sure that's the way we should be doing it, because I think we can get money from the private sector to do that. But if that's what we decide to do, we can do it. All right? So hopefully we're all in alignment that the park's important. That someone said that this 270 acres is the last chance we have for real economic development in southern Dallas. And I think there needs to be economic development there. But if we look at this as just an economic development play, then shame on us, because this is a park for people. I think we can use it as mixed use, but first and foremost, it's a park. And we need to make sure that we take care of the citizens, not the folks that want to rent space. There's ways to use it with education, And there's other things, and if there's a deal out there, we'll talk about it. But the primary focus is to put the park back into Fair Park, as we've said. Then the other thing I heard that, well, the idea is okay, but it's not big enough. We need to think bigger. It's one of these things where we've got to figure it out. I mean, are we not spending enough, or are we spending too much? And so, to me, this feels like Goldilocks just right to get this plane off the ground, and then it can grow to where it needs to go. And then I just want to say one last thing, and I may be wrong, but I don't think I am. I want to work on this. I want to get a deal done. You'll bring it back, and we'll vote it up or down. People want to make amendments, they can do that, and that's what we'll do. But we'll have one thing. If we don't pass this, this doesn't happen for the next 20 years. It just doesn't. We are too close. This has taken too much work. It is not going to happen. So the question is, do we want to make it good and make it happen, make it better and improve it, or do we want to kill it? And that's what makes a democracy, and we'll talk about it. For me, I'm for pushing it on. Let's get it done. The citizens of Dallas want it. The future generations want it. And I think we just started to see how powerful this could be. Mr. Human's going to go away at some point, and other people will come on, other councils, but they'll look back and say this was a critical point in the city of Dallas's life. Thank you for letting me pontificate. And if that's a question, Mr. McHugh, I'll answer. If it's a comment, I won't. Is it a question?
It's a question.
Please.
If I have to say it's a question.
Yes. Please, because we're not going to start talking about this.
Don't need
anymore.
to talk about it. I'm
Okay.
committed to help facilitate in the way you asked so far. I'm not committed to vote one way or the other.
I didn't say you did.
Don't want to be characterized as that at this point.
I didn't say you did. I said Mr. Medrano said he wouldn't.
Understood. I just want to make sure that's real clear for everybody out there moving forward.
Meeting's adjourned. Thank you.